The first time he touched me, my mother was lying unconscious in a hospital bed, and I was 12. No one ever asked what happened in that house while she was gone. No one wanted to know. I remember the sound of the wind scraping against the windows that night, the way the floor creaked under his weight. I remember holding my breath until my chest ached. My name is Loretta Sue Callahan. I'm 91 years old now, and for most of my life, I've hidden this story like a wound stitched shut with silence. If you've ever carried something too painful to say out loud, walk with me for a while. Maybe you'll see a piece of your story too. I grew up in a one-story house near the edge of a dusty cotton field in West Texas. The year was 1937, and the Dust Bowl hadn't just dried out the land, it had choked the spirit of our little town. Nothing moved too fast out there. Not the wind, not the gossip, not even time. Folks knew each other's names and sins, but we all kept our heads down, praying the crops might come back and the dirt might someday stop blowing. My family lived quiet lives. My mama, Margaret, was a strong woman, worn but graceful, with a singing voice that made you forget the world outside. She had 3 children before she married my stepfather. Earl, a tall, quiet man with stiff hands and a jaw that never smiled. He didn't talk much, and when he did, it was only to correct or command. Still, Mama believed in second chances. He's steady, she'd say, and steady is better than charm when the storm comes. Then Mama fell ill. Pneumonia, the doctor said. I remember the way her chest rattled when she coughed, and how pale her lips looked as she kissed our foreheads goodbye. They sent her to the county hospital 3 towns over. My older brother and sister were packed off to Aunt Clara's, but Earl insisted I stay. She needs someone to keep the house. He said, "Loretta's a good girl. She'll manage." I was 12. At first, he played the part of a caring guardian. He brought me soup, asked if I was warm enough. But it was the way he watched me that made my skin itch too long, too still. One night, he locked my bedroom door from the outside, just to keep you safe, he said, jangling the keys in his hand. A girl alone needs protecting. That was the first shift, the moment the house turned on me. At night, I curled up on the thin mattress, clutching my mother's scarf, the one that still smelled faintly of lavender and lye soap. I'd press it to my nose, praying for her voice, her touch, her return. But the silence in the house was thick, like the dust that crept into every crack. It coated the windowsills, the floorboards, and eventually, the space between my thoughts. Earl didn't hit. Not then, not yet, but something in his footsteps made my breath catch in my throat. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a hunter tracking a deer that had already been wounded. I didn't know what I was afraid of. I only knew that I was fear. At that age, is a shape without form. It lives in the pit of your stomach, in the corners of your eyes, in the hush that settles just before a door creaks open. Days blurred together. I stopped singing. I stopped playing. The house, once filled with Mama's humming and the clatter of breakfast dishes, now echoed with only 2 sounds, the ticking of the kitchen clock, and Earl's boots on the floor. No one called. No one came by. I didn't ask for help. I wouldn't have known how. What could I say? That the silence felt dangerous, that the dark corners of the house were watching me. I kept everything inside, even as it began to unravel me from the inside out. But silence was only the beginning. The darkness had only just begun to speak. It was late past midnight. I remember the ticking of the clock more than anything else. Tick, tick, tick. Each second felt louder than the last, like the house itself was holding its breath. I had drifted into a shallow sleep when the door creaked open. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Earl stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway lamp. His face was shadowed, unreadable. "You called out," he said softly. Stepping inside, "You were having a nightmare." I hadn't made a sound. I knew I hadn't, but I didn't say anything. I lay still, heart pounding like it wanted out of my chest. He walked slowly to the edge of the bed and sat down, the mattress dipping under his weight. The room, already cold, seemed to lose what little warmth it had left. "I just want to help you sleep," he said, brushing hair from my forehead like my mother used to. "It's just between us." His hand moved lower. I froze. My limbs felt locked in place, like I'd turned to stone. I wanted to scream, to run, but my voice, my breath, my will had vanished. I remember staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks, as though if I focused hard enough on something else, I might disappear. My skin turned cold. My thoughts floated far above the room. It was like stepping outside my own body, watching a nightmare happen to a girl I barely recognized. "Don't say a word," he whispered, his breath sour and thick. "You don't want to upset your mama, do you? She's not strong enough." This would kill her. Those words bound me tighter than any rope could. I didn't want to hurt my mama. I didn't want to be the reason she never came home. When he left, the silence didn't return, it shattered. I sat up, trembling, heart racing. My nightgown felt damp against my skin, and I didn't know whether it was sweat or something else. I couldn't breathe right. I fumbled to light the small lamp on the table and stumbled toward the wash basin. The water was cold, and I scrubbed until my skin burned, but nothing came clean, not really. Afterward, I wrapped myself in a quilt and sat on the floor by the bed. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't go back to that bed. My mother's scarf lay on the floor, crumpled. I held it to my face and cried without sound, afraid he'd hear. At dawn, I found a piece of paper in the kitchen drawer and wrote a letter. I didn't know who it was for, maybe my mama, maybe God, maybe a version of myself that hadn't been broken yet. I don't understand what happened. I wrote, "I'm scared. I feel dirty. Please make it stop." I folded the letter and placed it beneath my mattress, under the worn spot where the springs poked through. I never showed it to anyone. I never mailed it, but writing it down was the only way I knew how to say what I couldn't bear to speak. The next morning, Earl served breakfast like nothing had happened. He buttered toast, poured coffee, whistled a hymn under his breath. I sat across from him, quiet, nodding when spoken to. My voice was buried somewhere deep, behind a locked door with no key. I laughed when he made a joke. I thanked him for the eggs. I even asked how Mama was doing. And he said, "Still hanging on." I nodded, pretending that nothing had happened, that I was the same girl who had gone to bed the night before. But I wasn't. Something inside me had cracked quietly, invisibly, but permanently. It was the kind of break that doesn't bleed, doesn't bruise, but never truly heals. That was the first time. I didn't know it then, but it was only the beginning, and I had no idea how far the darkness would reach. The abuse didn't stop. It came back every week. Regular as Sunday church bells, only these visits came with locked doors and whispered lies. I started counting the days between the nights he chose me. Some weeks he skipped, as if sparing me was some sort of mercy. But most weeks, it came like a storm I couldn't stop quiet. Sudden, and always leaving damage behind. I stopped eating. My appetite slipped away like a friend who no longer recognized me. The food I used to love, Mama's peach preserves, cornbread with honey, turned to ash in my mouth. I dropped weight, and my cheeks hollowed. My smile disappeared first. My voice went second, after a while. Even I forgot what I used to sound like when I laughed. At school, my teacher, Miss Halbrook, pulled me aside one afternoon. "You're not yourself lately." "Loretta," she said gently, "is it your mother being sick?" I nodded. That was the only answer anyone wanted to hear. Grief was acceptable. Silence was tolerated. But truth was too messy for the world to hold. I started hurting myself in quiet ways, nothing anyone would notice. I bit my fingernails until they bled, picked at the skin on my arms until it stung under my dress sleeves, pulled strands of hair from my scalp when the nights got too heavy. There was something in the pain that grounded me. something I could control, when your body is no longer your own. Even the smallest act of rebellion feels like a fight for survival. I still prayed every night, not long, drawn-out prayers, but desperate whispers. God, please make it stop. Please make him forget me. Please bring Mama home. But each morning, I woke to the same silence. After a while, I stopped expecting answers. I wasn't sure anyone was listening anymore. Maybe God had turned his face away from me. Maybe I was too dirty to be seen. Then he started being nice again. Not with apologies, he never used that word, but with small things. A ribbon for my hair. A wooden comb he'd whittled himself. Left silently on my pillow like peace offerings I never asked for. Little gifts I didn't want. I hated myself for touching them. For keeping them. I hated that part of me still craved comfort. Even if it came from the hands that hurt me, sometimes, during those nights, I would float above myself. I stopped being Loretta. I imagined I was someone else, a girl in another house, with a real father, a safe room, a mother who never left. I would picture a window I could climb through, a road I could run down. I wasn't in my body anymore. I was outside it, watching like a ghost. I called it going away. I didn't have the words back then. But now I know dissociation. It's what happens when the pain is too much for a child to carry. The mind builds doors where there are none, and walks through them to survive. But each time I came back, I returned to the same four walls, the same air heavy with secrets. No matter how far I imagined myself running, I always woke up in that same bed, under that same ceiling, listening for his footsteps. I was no longer just a child enduring something awful. I was becoming someone else entirely quiet, invisible, folded in on herself like a note no one wanted to read. I wasn't just losing my childhood, I was losing myself. I began writing letters I never meant to send. Each night, after the house had gone still, and Earl's snores rumbled from the other room, I would light the stub of a candle and crouch over the wooden floor with a scrap of paper and a broken pencil. Dear Mama. I'd begin, then I'd tell her everything, every shadow, every sound, every touch that had no place in a child's life. I told her how I couldn't eat the soup she left in the icebox because it reminded me of the days before. I told her how I wrapped her scarf around my wrist at night like a tether to another world. I told her how afraid I was to sleep, to wake, to breathe too loudly. I poured myself onto those pages, all the words I never dared say out loud. And then, always, I tore them up, sometimes into careful, folded squares I buried at the bottom of the stove ash. Other times I ripped them fast, like I was tearing the thoughts from my own head. I was terrified someone, especially Earl, might find them. I didn't know what he'd do if he saw what I wrote, but I believed it would be worse than anything he'd already done. Still, one night, my hands trembling and heart pounding, I tucked a letter inside the back cover of the Bible my grandmother had given me the year before she died. It was thin, worn leather, the kind that smelled like dust and memory. I placed the letter between the pages of Psalms. Something about that felt right, and closed it like sealing a wound. I didn't mean to keep it. Not really. But I didn't destroy it either. The next morning, I slipped the Bible behind the rows of canned peaches in the pantry, where no one but Mama ever looked. That Bible sat there for years, untouched and unopened, gathering the scent of dust and syrup. I forgot about it, or at least, I tried to. That letter, just one among dozens, would one day change everything. But not yet. Not while I was still living inside the story I hadn't survived. In the meantime, I started marking time in a different way. I took the cardboard insert from a shoebox and, using a safety pin, scratched tiny marks into it. One for each night he came into my room. I folded it into the sole of my Sunday shoes, hidden under the heel so that it was close to me, but invisible to everyone else. It became my secret calendar, a record no one could take from me. Each red mark, drawn later in lipstick I stole from Mama's drawer. Felt like a scream I couldn't release. Some weeks had 2 marks, some had 5. Once, there were 7. A whole week. Sometimes I would slip off my shoe and trace the edge of the cardboard with my thumb. Feeling the ridges, counting, remembering. I needed to remember. If I didn't, it would all disappear into the fog. And he'd win again. That calendar never lied. It didn't whisper that I imagined it. It didn't flinch when I cried. It was the only place I could be honest, with no words, no tears, just marks. Every red mark on that secret calendar was a wound, and there were too many to count. It happened the summer my cousin June came to visit. She was only 8 then, wide-eyed, barefoot most days, her hair in lopsided braids that smelled like sun and salt. She followed me everywhere, asking questions about everything, calling me Letty like it was the name of a fairy tale character. For the first time in years, I let myself smile, even laugh, but then I noticed something that turned my blood cold. Earl had started watching her, not in the way a stepfather watches a guest, not with kindness or interest, but with that same heavy stillness I'd come to recognize over the years, the kind that made the air tighten around you like a noose. I caught him staring from the porch, from the hallway, from the kitchen doorway while she played with her dolls. His eyes didn't blink. He'd lick his thumb, flip a page in his newspaper, then glance again. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that I was seeing through broken glass and mistaking shapes. But then, one afternoon, I found June sitting on the back steps, her face pale, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. When I asked what was wrong, she said, "Uncle Earl wanted me to sit on his lap. I didn't want to. He got mad. My stomach flipped. My hands went numb. I couldn't breathe. It hit me like a freight train. I wasn't the end of this nightmare. I was the beginning, and if I stayed quiet, it would only keep spreading, like mold under floorboards." That night, I decided I would try to tell someone, anyone. I chose Aunt Naomi, June's mother, a firm but loving woman who had once stitched a ripped hem on my Sunday dress. She smelled like eucalyptus and laundry soap. Surely, she would see it. Surely, she would know. I waited until we were alone. Folding clothes in the bedroom, I told her everything, not the details. Not yet, I couldn't speak those aloud, but I told her Earl was dangerous, that he had been doing things to me, that I was scared for June. She blinked at me, shook her head slightly, then gave a tight laugh. "Oh, honey, you're just going through changes. Hormones make the mind wild. I remember what it was like at that age." Then she added, gently, "Don't stir up trouble in a house that's already stretched thin." I nodded. I didn't say another word. I folded the rest of the sheets in silence and walked out of the room. That night, something inside me broke. I went into the kitchen after everyone had gone to bed. The lantern on the counter cast shadows that flickered like ghosts on the walls. I opened the cupboard and found a cracked china plate Mama had kept since her wedding. I took it in both hands and smashed it against the floor. A shard, sharp and smooth, landed near my foot. I picked it up and stared at it for a long time. I needed something real, something sharp enough to cut through the fog in my chest. Something louder than the silence, stronger than the shame. Then, I pressed it against my palm first gently, then harder, until it bit through the skin. The pain was electric, bright, real, more real than anything had felt in months. Blood spilled down my wrist and into the crook of my elbow. I watched it, transfixed, as if it belonged to someone else. Part of me wondered if it did. Earl found me standing there. I saw his eyes widen, saw the panic rise not out of love or worry, but something baser, fear. He grabbed a dish towel and wrapped my hand roughly. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he hissed. I didn't flinch. Instead, I looked him straight in the eye for the first time. Not as a scared child, but as someone who had nothing left to lose. "I'll tell," I said. The words weren't loud, but they didn't have to be. They hung between us like thunder in a quiet sky. His face changed. The color drained. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. And just like that, the monster grew afraid. Mama came home on a Tuesday morning. I remember because the sun had just started to warm the frost off the porch steps, and the chickens outside made a kind of nervous racket, as if they sensed something had changed. Earl was gone to the market. I was in the pantry when I heard the slow creak of the front door and the gentle tap of her cane against the floorboards. She looked thinner than before. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her hair had lost its luster. The pneumonia had stolen weight, breath, and something else I couldn't name, but her eyes still searched the room like they were looking for something sacred. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I ran to her, and the second I touched the hem of her coat, I collapsed. My knees hit the floor, and I buried my face into her skirt like I was 6 years old again. The sobs came fast, sharp, and violent, like they'd been trapped behind my ribs for too long and were finally breaking through. I shook in her arms. She didn't speak. She didn't ask what was wrong, but she held me. She held me tighter than she ever had in my life. It wasn't the hold of someone trying to understand, it was the hold of someone who already did. Her hand moved over my hair slowly, methodically, like she was memorizing the shape of my head all over again, and in that quiet embrace, something loosened, just a little. That evening, the house was quiet. Earl still hadn't returned. Mama sat at the kitchen table, her tea untouched, a worn Bible resting beneath her frail hands. I watched from the doorway as she slowly opened its cover. I felt my heart drop. She turned the first few pages, and there it was, the letter I thought I had hidden away, folded, creased, and still smudged with my trembling words. She read it in silence, no gasp, no tears, just a single breath that she let out so slowly I thought it might break her ribs. She didn't call for me. She didn't ask who or when or how. She closed the Bible, slid the letter back between its pages, and rested her palm on the cover like she was sealing something sacred. Her other hand trembled slightly as she brought the teacup to her lips. She drank, stared out the window, and said nothing at all. The next morning, Earl was gone. No suitcase, no note, just the sound of the screen door slapping shut in the early light, and his truck rumbling down the dirt road toward nowhere. He never came back, and Mama never explained it. We never talked about what was in the letter, or what she'd read between the lines, but something shifted between us, a kind of truce built on grief, pain, and a silent knowing. The silence that followed was not like before. It didn't suffocate or coil around my chest. It didn't carry the weight of shame or fear. It was quieter. Yes, but full. Like a lullaby hummed without words. It protected me. It wrapped around our small house like a second skin. Earl's shadow no longer crept down the hallway. My meals didn't stick in my throat anymore. I slept through the night for the first time in years. Mama and I didn't need to speak of monsters to believe they existed. We had lived through them. We had survived them. The silence that once imprisoned me now became my shield. The years passed quietly, as they tend to when you build your life not from joy, but from survival. I finished high school in the same town that nearly broke me. I left for college with nothing but a small suitcase, a partial scholarship, and my mother's Bible still holding the letter that had changed everything. I never took it out. In time, I met a man named Howard. He was patient and gentle, the kind who waited for the silence between sentences instead of rushing to fill it. We married in a courthouse with no guests, no white dress. I couldn't bring myself to wear one. Together, we had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and I swore they would never live in a home where doors were locked from the outside or monsters lurked in daylight. I became a school librarian. The quiet suited me. I organized stories and catalogued the words of others because my own still felt too heavy to say. But I watched the children carefully, their hands, their eyes, the way they sat when no one thought they were being seen. I didn't know I was looking for something until one day I found it. She was in 3rd grade. Her name was Janie. I had offered her a tissue during reading hour because she was sneezing and her nose was red. When I gently touched her shoulder, she flinched so hard she knocked her chair over. The room fell silent. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear, and I saw something I recognized too well, something that didn't belong in a child's gaze. Later that day, I asked her to stay behind during recess. We sat in my office. The walls were lined with books, but none of them could have prepared me for what I needed to say. My mouth went dry. I had never said it aloud before, not to my own children. Not even to Howard. "Has anyone ever hurt you?" "Janie," I asked. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes locked on mine, then fell to the floor. I breathed in but didn't breathe out. I felt my lungs freeze. Time thickened around us like syrup. Then, finally, she nodded. No tears, just that one small nod. And in that moment, I felt the years collapse on top of me. I sank to the floor, not suddenly, not like falling, but slowly. Like the weight had finally caught up with my knees. She came to, sitting beside me, her tiny hand in mine. I cried, not just for her, for the girl I used to be. For all the letters I never sent. For the silence I once mistook for safety. I made sure Janie was protected. That day changed the course of her life, but it also changed mine. I enrolled in night classes, studied trauma counseling, and by the time I turned 50, I had become a certified counselor for abused girls. I spent the next 2 decades listening to other children's stories, some whispered, some shouted, some only hinted at between long pauses. Every time I saw a child flinch, every time I heard a sentence trail off into silence, I knew how to sit with them in it. I never tried to fill the quiet. I let it settle. I let it speak. Because I had learned long ago that silence could crush you, or it could be a resting place between the pain and the healing. I couldn't erase my pain, but I could help someone carry theirs. At 90, I woke one morning with the strange feeling that something inside me had shifted, not like the slow changes of aging stiff joints, thinning hair, but something deeper, something quieter. I had spent most of my life keeping my story folded away like a letter that never found its envelope. But that morning, I knew it was time to speak. I went to the cedar box I kept at the back of my closet. It smelled of old pine and dust, and when I opened it, my hands trembled. Inside were things I hadn't touched in decades. The folded calendar I had once hidden in my shoe. The one marked in red, each mark a memory I had fought to forget. Next to it were the torn letters I had written and never mailed. Some barely legible now. Their ink faded by time and tears. I laid them out on the dining table, one by one, like pieces of a life I no longer feared. I wasn't sure what to do with them until I saw my granddaughter, Evelyn, walking up the driveway that afternoon. She had just left her husband, an angry man, who had made her afraid to sleep at night. I had watched her for years, biting her tongue, smiling when she should have screamed, and though I never pushed her to speak, I recognized that look in her eyes. I had worn it myself once. That evening, I asked her to sit with me. I didn't say much, just turned on the old cassette recorder I kept in the drawer beside my bed. I picked up one of the letters, creased, yellowed, fragile, and began to read aloud. "My name is Loretta Sue Callahan," I said, my voice shaking, and when I was 12 years old, my stepfather locked the door behind him. Evelyn didn't speak. She didn't need to. As the tape clicked on and captured my voice, I felt something lift off my chest that had been there for almost 80 years. I wasn't just telling her my story, I was telling her our story. I was reaching through time to place a hand on her back and say, "You are not alone." In the days that followed, I began writing, not to publish, not to impress, just to remember, and to leave something behind that might light the path for someone else. I called it The House with No Windows, because that was what it felt like growing up in that place, a house where light couldn't enter and voices didn't echo, where pain grew in the dark and truth lived beneath the floorboards, page by page. I wrote it all down, the nights I counted breaths to survive. The lies I told so no one would look too closely. The girl I used to be, who disappeared behind silence and duty and fear. And slowly, the writing became something else, not just a reckoning, a reclaiming. When I finished the first draft, I closed the notebook and stared at the final sentence. It was not to scream, not to whisper, just a simple truth I had waited a lifetime to say. My stepfather may have stolen my childhood, but not my voice. That line held everything: the fear, the courage, the ache, and the choice I made not just to survive, but to rise, and now, is give that voice to you. I am no longer afraid of shadows. I've lived long enough to see them pass across my walls and out the other side. The fear that once froze me in bed, waiting for the sound of his footsteps, no longer holds power. At 91, I sit in the same rocking chair where I once cradled my children. And I think of that girl, the one I used to be. She still lives inside me. But now, she smiles sometimes. Now, she sings to the wind. If you're listening to this, maybe you know that silence. Maybe you've tasted that kind of fear, the kind that lives behind your ribs and never quite lets go. But I want you to remember this. You may be broken, but you are not beyond healing. The heart knows how to stitch itself. Thread by thread, you only have to let it begin. Healing does not mean forgetting. It means choosing, every day, to build something new on the ground where pain once stood. If someone hurt you, and you're still silent, I see you, I was you, and I want you to hear this. You were never to blame, not then, not now, and it's not too late to reclaim your voice, your story, your light, even if the world told you to be quiet. I'm here to say speak. If this story touched something in you, don't let it stay in the dark. Share your truth, like, comment, subscribe, because the more we speak, the more we heal. Together, we can break the silence that bound us. And together, we can build a world where every girl, every child, every soul knows they are not alone. The girl who once whispered into her pillow now sings without fear.